Okay, good morning. Okay, so today you'll notice we are live on Collaborate. If you're sitting here in the classroom, you will see, you can't see the chat window. That is not intentional. It's because we can't use a Windows machine for Collaborate. They're going to restart the server on Sunday, but that doesn't help us for today. So Brian's changing PowerPoints, an actual native PowerPoint if you're in the class, but we are still on Collaborate on mobile devices. So we'll see if Brian and I can get out of sync or not. So we'll get started. And the first thing is, I know some of you were reading your email and I did want to talk about this. We've had class 4 days, and of the 4 days, Brian and I's equipment has worked 2 out of 4. I used Collaborate all last semester, and so we're having some hiccups with Collaborate. They're working on it. I still feel this is a really good option to have to offer it live, but I am not going to hold anyone responsible for a pop quiz when I know these hiccups are happening. So I don't want anyone nervous or freaking out that they can't log in if they have the same issue I have. So my Macs are working. Windows is not for me. So I've decided that we are not going to have any pop quizzes. That means there is, I don't take attendance. So I really want you to come to class. And as I was talking before class, what happens, the reason I have pop quizzes is because I want it to be a priority for you to attend class. And I don't care if you come in person or you watch live online. But what happens is all of a sudden there's not an attendance option. You can have the best intentions in the world of watching the lecture later, watching class later, but there's 2 problems with watching it later. First of all, it tends to get deprioritized. Life happens. Things happen and you don't get to it, and then you miss it, and then it's too late and you never see it. Secondly, if you attend live, you have an opportunity to ask questions. You can either ask live in here or you can ask Brian questions, but you lose that if you're not attending live. And this class is designed to be live. This class is not designed to be an asynchronous class. If it were asynchronous, I would record lectures ahead of time, and you really lose something if you're going to not attend all the time. But that said, that is certainly an option now. I will also say that if you come to class, be prepared to participate. If you're just going to sit there and wait to write everything down and not try anything, any of the questions that I put up, then you might as well not come then, because you could just watch it passively. This class is meant to try things. If you don't get it right, to ask questions about why. So that said, so there's no more pop quizzes in this class. So attendance is not required. So that's up to you. I would urge you to come or to attend live online, but I wanted to take the stress out because Collaborate is having some hiccup issues. Class is always recorded. It's recorded on Collaborate, and it's available on YouTube. If there would become a day, just so you know, if there would ever come a day where we cannot record either the 9:15 or the 11 o'clock class, know that right as soon as we're done with class, Brian and I would go upstairs and I would record class and it would be available. So no worries that if technology ever completely fails us, we do have backup plans galore. Okay, so any questions about that before we get started? Okay, and they tell me, we were also discussing here, they tell me it's going to be what, sub-zero Monday and Tuesday? That said, I think it's a really good idea if you think about using Collaborate next week, if this is the only thing you're coming for, or if you could possibly stay home, because that's really cold. And just depends how it is. We'll see how it goes. But do consider that. Okay, so that said, we're going to get started on the first question for today. We have a few homework problems today. We have some questions today. This first question, your first chance to participate today, at the end of the current accounting period, it gives us some account balances. Now we have to figure out the liabilities for the period. What you should all do right now on your paper, if you have paper in front of you, is write down the accounting equation. Okay? So write down the accounting equation, and your objective now is to classify each of these accounts. I'll clue you in that the statements we did last class on Tuesday, we did a balance sheet, and that would tell you what kind of accounts these are. So you have to solve for liabilities. So I'm going to go silent for a couple minutes, give you a chance to solve this. Yeah. You are completely in charge of online. Now you've taken away my ability to answer.
If I have a question that
Yeah. You have an idea how to answer this? Okay. You know the answer already? Yes. Do you have this one? Write down the accounting equation. Start filling this out. Yes. Yep. Great. No. I'm watching this. There. Okay. Okay, so how we do this one is we have the accounting equation. Assets equal liabilities plus equity. We can rearrange that to be assets minus equity equal liabilities, and then we identify what's what. Our assets in that equation are cash and accounts receivable. Assets are things that we own that turn into ultimately cash. They're resources, economic resources that we own. So we have cash, obviously what cash is. Accounts receivable are amounts due from our customers. So we sell stuff to our customers say we'll pay you later. That IOU from our customer, that receivable due to us, is going to turn into cash, so that has future economic value, so that's an asset. So our assets are the $15,000 plus the $20,000. So we basically have $35,000 in assets. Our equity accounts up there, equity, common stock plus retained earnings are both equity accounts. Common stock refers to our own stock that we've issued. Okay, so that's what's invested in the business from investors. So common stock, $8,000, retained earnings, $14,000. So the difference between our assets and our equity is our liabilities, and the answer is $13,000. Don't worry about me. I mean, I don't need to. Okay. I'm actually looking at quite a few. Okay, so exercise 1-17A. This is one of the homework problems. And this one I really liked because it's actually a lot easier than it looks. At first it seems like there's a lot of requirements. It tells us that our company has current assets of $280 million, property, plant, and equipment of $430 million, and other assets $170 million. So that whole first sentence are assets. Then it tells us current liabilities are $170 million and long-term liabilities are $300 million. So it says use this data to write the donut shop's accounting equation. Now the accounting equation is assets equal liabilities plus equity. Okay. Okay. Assets equal liabilities plus equity. So now what we need to do is we need to put our numbers in there. So we said assets were that first sentence. So we had assets of $280 million, current assets, property, plant, and equipment of $430 million, and other assets of $170 million. So those are our assets, the numbers I have in red. And then our liabilities are the second sentence. So we have the $170 million and the $300 million. And then we're solving for equity. So if we add the assets up, the 280 plus the 430 plus the 170, we will get, I believe, 880. Yes? Okay. And then if we add the liabilities up, we get 470. So we have 880 of assets equal liabilities of 470 plus equity. So we have to solve for equity. How we get that is we take the 880, subtract the 470, and we get 410 as our equity. Okay? So the bottom line where I have 880 equals 470 plus 410, that is the answer to requirement 1, where it says use these data to write their accounting equation. Their accounting equation is assets equal liabilities plus equity. So they have assets of 880, they have liabilities of 470, and they have equity of 410. Okay, so that is the answer for requirement 1. Now the next 3 requirements, super easy. You just have to know what to look for. First of all, number 2, there are no computations for 2, 3, and 4. They're just answering with numbers you already calculated. Number 2, how much in resources does Copy Shop have to work with? How much in resources? Well, what are the company's resources? Those are the company's assets. So the answer for number 2 is going to be their assets, 880. Okay? So you can use the accounting equation to answer these questions. So then requirement 3, how much does the Copy Shop owe creditors? Owing creditors, that's liabilities. So how much are the Copy Shop's liabilities? Their liabilities are going to be the 470. So the 470 is the liabilities. Okay, liabilities is 470. And then finally, that fourth question, how much of the company's assets do the Copy Shop stockholders actually own? What stockholders actually own is represented by equity. So the answer for number 4 is the equity of 410. Right. Okay. So see, that one's not bad. You have the assets, the liabilities, you solve for equity, and then you answer the questions about what each of those ones do. Okay, so I think we did this question Tuesday, but it's a good review. We have a question of when total expenses Brian? Exceed total revenues, the result is, and we talked about this on Tuesday, so we're just going to go forward with this. The total expenses exceed revenues, that's when we have a net loss. And it will appear there. Okay. Okay, so total expenses exceed total revenues. The result is a net loss. Okay, so now we're going to go on to another homework problem. And again, this one's pretty small too. It's 119A, and there's two independent parts of it. So 119A, okay, so in 119A, we have a company began the year with total liabilities of $95,000 and total stockholders' equity of $35,000. During the year, total assets increased by 5%. How much are total assets at the end of the year? So in this situation, the first thing we need to do, they're telling us liabilities, they're telling us equity, so we need to calculate you okay? Because you can't hear me well enough? Yeah, I can't. It is what it is. Okay. That looks attractive. For those of you that can't see, Brian's got earbud with lots of cord in his ear. Okay. Okay, so back to item 1. Diamond Incorporated began the year with total liabilities of $95, total equity of $35. So our total assets, we're going to add liabilities and equity together. We'll get total assets of $130,000. Then it tells us during the year, total assets increased by 5%. So advance. So we'll take the 5%, we want a 5% increase. To increase something by 5%, you take 1 plus 5%. So we take 130,000 times 1.05 to get 136,500 as the answer. We could have taken 5% of 130,000, which is 6,500, and added it to 130,000 and gotten that same answer. Okay. So that's part 1, and that's completely unrelated to part 2. Good. Good. Okay. Okay, so for part 2 says Northwest Airlines began the year with total assets of $100,000 and total liabilities of $52,000. Net income for the year was $27,000 and dividends were 0. Okay, so this one, not a lot of computations, but we have to walk through it pretty carefully. So we began the year with total assets of $100,000, total liabilities of $52,000. So knowing that, what's our equity at the beginning of the year? We can calculate it, right? We can take the $100,000, subtract liabilities of $52,000, we get $48,000. That's our equity at the beginning of the year. Okay, so that's our beginning of the year equity, and I have to emphasize that our beginning of the year equity is $48,000. It's asking us for the equity at the end of the year. So what impacts equity? Equity is increased by net income and decreased by dividends. So what we will see in this problem then is we will take our $48,000 of equity from the beginning of the year, add our net income of 27 and subtract our dividends of 0. Okay, now, there we go. Okay, so that beginning amount, that first row, beginning amount, we got our $48,000 of stockholders' equity. That's our equity at the very beginning of the year. We add to that our net income. If we had dividends, we would subtract that. When we pay dividends, when the company pays dividends, it reduces stockholders' equity. Okay, So the answer for part 2 here is $75,000. Net income increases equity. If that were a net loss, it would decrease equity. Okay? So net income increases equity. Dividends always decrease equity. Okay? And we don't have any dividends, so we don't need to worry about that. Okay, any questions about that one? Okay, and next we're going to do a question, and I'm going to give you the answer and we're going to talk about it because we haven't talked about 2 terms yet. So net income is the profit left over after subtracting expenses and losses from revenues and gains. The answer to this one is true. Okay, so to explain this, we said that net income is revenues minus expenses, and revenues and expenses are related to our normal business. Once in a while we have things called gains and losses, and we're not going to deal with gains and losses for several chapters, but gains and losses refer to things that aren't part of our normal business. For example, if we are a clothing store, and so we sell clothing, so we have expenses of the store clerks, the utilities, all those kind of things. And we have revenues from selling the clothing. And then let's say we have a building and that we bought 30 years ago and we no longer need it, so we sell it and we have this big gain. We sell it for way more than we purchased it for. That's considered a gain. It's not part of revenues because it's not what we normally do. So it's considered a gain. A loss would be if we sold that building at a loss. So we don't need to focus on what gains or losses are, other than to know gains act the same way as revenues do in terms of affecting net income. Expenses and losses affect net income the same way. So if we were calculating net income, it would be revenues and gains minus expenses and losses. So that's all that the point of this is. We won't get into specifics of gains and losses yet, but it's enough to know that they're there. Okay, so what we're going to do now is we have 2 sets of problems. Now this data, the data that's in the first part of the screen, the upper half of the screen here, this data we will use for 3 questions. So we're going to do this question and then 2 more for that common data set. So I'm going to pause for a minute, let you write, I think there's 10 numbers there. So write down the account names and the 10 numbers, and then we're going to talk about each of those, and then we're going to go through and answer those questions. And we are going to use the same set of data for the next 2 questions, so a total of 3 questions. Okay, before we answer this question, I want to talk about each one of these accounts and kind of identify them. So we're going to identify them as assets, liabilities, or equity, meaning revenues or expenses. So the first one, accounts payable. What would accounts payable be? Liability, yes. Cash? Asset. You want to keep going? Common stock? Equity, yes. Okay.
I don't know about that.
Okay, cost of goods sold. I'll take that one because that's kind of new for us. Cost of goods sold is an expense account. Expense accounts reduce equity. So it's kind of an equity account, but it reduces income. Cost of goods sold is one of the few expense accounts that does not have the word expense as part of the title. It's the major expense account we have. It's typically the very first expense that's listed. Cost of goods sold is the cost of our merchandise. Okay, so we have cost of goods sold. The next one down, dividends, equity. Dividends reduce equity. Equipment. Equipment, let's reason our way through it. What's an asset? Yeah. She just said assets are stuff that's resources. Yeah, this is definitely a resource. We can use it in our business. It has economic value to us. Okay, so equipment is an asset. What about inventory? Asset, yes, yes. So you're almost through here. I think you're going to be good. Long-term debt? Liability. Revenues? Equity. Revenues increase equity. And finally, salaries expense? Expense. Expense. Hint. Equity. Yes, and they reduce. Yes. Salaries expense is like cost of goods sold expense. Salaries expense is an equity account, and expenses reduce equity. Okay, so that wasn't part of the question at all, but that will help us do each one of these questions. So if you were playing along as we went, do you know how many assets we have? Yes, we have 3 assets. So if you go through, we identified cash, equipment, and inventory all as assets. So if we add up cash, equipment, and inventory, they will total $149,000. And if we click one more time, we will get $74,000 plus $50,000 plus $25,000. Okay, so that's the answer when we're talking about total assets. We had those 3 assets identified. So that's not too bad. These questions are examples of things you should be able to answer. Let me digress for a moment before we go to the next one. For your exam here, which is a ways off, but it's good to be thinking about it now, is you will be able to have one 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper. I don't care which section you're in, section 1, 2, 5, or 6, doesn't matter if you're taking it in the computer lab or online with Dr. Yu, you get a piece of paper. So an 8.5 by 11 piece of paper is just one of these. You get one physical sheet of paper. I want to take this opportunity to say 2 single-sided pages are not the same as one piece of paper. It's one physical sheet of paper. You cannot staple it together or tape it together. But I digress. We'll talk about that more. So you get one piece of paper. This one piece of paper you can write anything on either side. You can type it. You can do whatever. You just have to be able to read it with your naked eye. You can't use a magnifying glass. So, okay. So, but I know you all have really good eyes that can see really tiny because I see some of these and they're amazing. But you can write things on this sheet. And this says you don't have to memorize everything. Now those things, I will periodically tell you things I would put on the sheet. I'm not making your sheet for you. Part of the learning process is deciding what goes onto that sheet and making it sense for you. But here's one of my tips for today. On my sheet from Tuesday, we did an income statement, we did a balance sheet, we did a statement of retained earnings. I would put those on my sheet. They only would take a little bit of time, but you could identify a lot of accounts. Like on the balance sheet, you'd see a lot of these accounts, or you could group things similar. I would put example statements on there. I would put the accounting equation on there. If you have trouble with algebra, go ahead and write the 3 equations. How do you solve for equity? How do you solve for liabilities? How do you solve for assets? So this is something that, you know, you add the three things together. So anyways, I'm back on track. I'll talk more about exams later coming up. I just wanted to point that out, that occasionally I'll say, these are really good things to put on that sheet. And those statements from Monday are really good things to put on that sheet. Okay, so we did total assets. Our next question, I believe, is total liabilities. So using that same data set to calculate total liabilities for the company. Okay, total liabilities for the company, we identified them as a hint. As you're looking through your list, there are two liabilities. Okay, and those two liabilities would be accounts payable and long-term debt. So we have the $12,000 accounts payable plus the long-term debt of $33,000. So we get $45,000. One more. Okay, so $12,000 plus $33,000. Okay, now, give me a minute to finish writing that. The next question we're going to do here is to calculate net income for the year. Okay, so you have to calculate net income. So the first thing you would say was, how do you calculate net income? What's that quote-unquote formula? You should know that. That would be something I'd write on my sheet if I didn't know it. Net income would be revenues minus expenses. So you're going to see no, I know, but I'm just trying to figure out where my, okay. It's revenues minus expenses, so it'll be $200,000 of revenues minus cost of goods sold, remember that's an expense, minus salaries expense of $24,000. So we're going to get the is this math work? I'm looking at two different things here. We're not synced in the same question. How? What's 200 minus 85 minus 24? Got a calculator? 91,000, but it's showing. Oh, the your slide is wrong. I know, yeah. We'll blame Brian. That's his. Yeah, I just emailed it before I saved it. So, okay. So the answer online, if you're watching this on Collaborate, it's right. Okay. This was just an update that we made that didn't filter through in our backup plan. Okay. So go ahead and fix it, Brian. You know how to do it? Just escape. Up one, go there. That one. There we go. Okay. There we go. All better. Okay. Perfect. Okay. Okay, so online you didn't see that. That was, we had a typo on the one we're displaying on in class. So it is 91,000. I thought that didn't look right. Okay. So any questions about this set of questions? So those aren't bad, but those are the kind of questions you'll see. Your exam will be about, I don't know, 25%, half multiple choice like this. And it will also be homework problems. So the same homework problems that you're in My Accounting Lab are on the exam. You use My Accounting Lab to take the exam. Okay, so it should look and feel very similar, very familiar. Okay, so then we get on to our next set of questions. And again, we have a common set of data for the next three questions. So those numbers starting with revenue, cost of goods sold, that's all going to stay the same. So again, I'll go quiet for a few minutes, let you write those down, and then we'll talk about what we have here. Ryan, is my audio back on? Yes?
Yeah.
You can hear me? Good. Okay. Questions? Okay, what we have here, we're given revenue, we're given cost of goods sold, salaries expense, utilities expense, and dividends, and then the beginning of year balance of retained earnings and assets at the end of the year and common stock at the end of the year. So they want us to compute the amount of net income for our loss for the year. So first thing we say, how do we calculate net income? Net income is always going to be revenues minus expenses, okay? So we're going to go through that list and pick out our revenue accounts and our expense accounts. We have one revenue account, that's the $139,500. We have three expense accounts. We have cost of goods sold. Cost of goods sold is an expense. Salaries expense and utilities expense. Those are our expenses. So if we calculate that, our net income is $38,400. That $38,400 is our net income, and we're going to use that in our next question. So we have to make sure that we know where the $38,400 came from, because we'll use it in a bit. I do want to point out, and I want to emphasize here, that dividends is not an expense account. Dividends are dividends we pay our stockholders as a reward for holding our stock. There's two. As a stockholder, you invest in stock for one or two reasons. So you either one or both reasons. You either invest in it for the income from the dividends, or you invest in it for the increase in value in the stock over time, or you want a combination of both. You can take entire courses on dividend theory. There is not a right answer for whether a company pays a dividend or not. Apple is preparing to, has been paying pretty big dividends because they have a stockpile of cash. Their major shareholder has sued them saying, return some of that cash to the shareholders. Don't hang on to it all. On the other hand, First Energy here in Akron just slashed their dividend greatly because they need cash. A dividend is not a legal liability until they declare it, until the company declares it. So there is no right or wrong answer about if a company declares a dividend or not. It's a way to reward shareholders, and your shareholders may be looking for a dividend return, or they may be looking for growth over time. It just depends on the industry and the stock, and there's no right or wrong answer about whether we pay dividends or not. So when you see dividends, when you see just the word dividends, that means this company has paid dividends. If you see the words in combination, dividend income or dividend revenue, that means this company has an investment and they're earning dividends on an investment they hold. But when you see, the most common thing in this class will be to see dividends, and that means when you just have the word dividends, that means this company paid dividends. Dividends reduces retained earnings, it reduces stockholders' equity, and it has absolutely zero impact on net income. And that's something you want to write down. You want to make sure that you know that the dividends have zero impact on net income. They will never impact net income. Okay, question 2. So the same data set, just a reminder that we have net income from question 1 of $38,400. Compute the ending retained earnings balance. So we need to compute the ending retained earnings balance. Ending retained earnings balance in terms of a formula. How do I get ending retained earnings balance? I'm going to start with the beginning balance in retained earnings. And I'm going to add my net income and subtract dividends. Okay, so beginning retained earnings plus smart income minus dividends will give me ending retained earnings. So now that I have this formula, and this is a good thing to know, how do I get ending retained earnings? Well, I take beginning, add net income, subtract dividends, so we can plug the numbers in. Our beginning balance and retained earnings from the problem was $51,000. Our net income from the last part from question 1 was $38,400, and then our dividends are $7,000. So what we end up getting is $51,000 plus $38,400 in the net income minus $7,000 of dividends gives us ending retained earnings of $82,400. Okay, that $82,400, that's our ending retained earnings balance. We are going to need that in the next question. So that $82,400, we're going to use that in the next question. The next question is probably the most challenging question, but it's still not bad if we write down what we know. So the next question says to compute the amount of liabilities at the end of the year. Okay, compute the amount of liabilities at the end of the year. So the first thing I would do for this, whenever you have to solve for assets or liabilities, the first thing you're going to want to do is write down the accounting equation. Accounting equation is assets equal liabilities plus equity. Now, assets equal liabilities plus equity. You are going to then, we have to go a little bit further. We don't have just one lump sum equity. We have common stock and we have retained earnings. Common stock plus retained earnings is equity. We know that. So our modified accounting equation is assets equal liabilities plus common stock plus retained earnings. So we know that we can substitute the numbers in from above. So my assets were given end of year assets $205,000. We're solving for liabilities. Common stock at the end of the year was $85,000. Retained earnings, we know from the beginning of the year, from the question right before this, $82,400. So then our liabilities are $37,600. And while I leave this slide up, I want to talk about tutoring real quick too. We have tutoring starting for this class. There'll be tutoring on Tuesdays and Thursdays immediately following this class. And there'll be tutoring on Wednesday mornings as well. There's 6 different 1-hour sessions. Each session is roughly the same. You're welcome to go to more than one. Our tutoring though, we limit it to 9 people at the most for a session because the room's only that big and there's only so much effectiveness you can have with a large group for tutoring. So what I do is each week this semester, at the end of the week, Friday or Saturday, I will email out the sign-up links for tutoring. You do not need to be in academic crisis to use tutoring. If you just want a little bit of reassurance or go back over something, I would encourage you to go to tutoring. Certainly if you're floundering, go to tutoring. Chapter 1, Chapter 2, and Chapter 3 are huge for the rest of the semester. These are the ones that you really need to know, and it's really a good idea. Haley does tutoring. She did it last semester, did a very nice job. She's very friendly, very accessible. So I would encourage you to do that. We are full for today, so if you signed up for tutoring, I had emailed out about it. If you signed up for tutoring, be sure and go. If you sign up for tutoring, be sure to go. If you don't, if you know you're not going to go, you need to email me and let me know, because we generally fill the spots every day, and you'll hear from me if you sign up and don't show, because then you've taken somebody's spot. We're happy to accommodate, but make sure if you sign up that you actually go. So, and Haley will email you the night before tutoring to confirm or remind, and she'll give you the room number then. Occasionally tutoring will change rooms, most of the time not. So do watch for that. I will probably email next week's tutoring sign up tomorrow. It will always be as an announcement on Blackboard as well. We schedule out 1 week in advance. Okay, so next we're going to review what we have due this week. This week is, okay. This week we have due Saturday homework, Chapter 1, Part 2. So that was mainly homework problems we did in class Tuesday and Thursday. We have attendance quiz 4. Yes. Very well could be. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, the question was, were the questions we go over in class on the attendance quiz. Yeah, I mean, that's right, yeah. Okay, so homework Chapter 1, Part 2, the attendance quiz. Attendance quiz is directly taken from what we do in class. It could be the questions we do in class. Sometimes the answers are changed a little bit, so do read, because sometimes we'll switch the question from class to put not, and then you have to put the opposite answer or something. So do read them carefully. Generally, they're very close. The attendance quiz will become available today around 5 p.m. Those are the homework and that attendance quiz are due Saturday night. Then Sunday night, video quiz 5, which covers lectures over Chapter 2, is due Sunday night, and that video quiz is in my accounting lab as well. So, any questions before we go? Okay, have a nice weekend. Stay warm. Thank you.